If your vessel is not afloat and upright, you are having a very bad day. It is important for the boatmaster to understand the basic principles that keep vessels afloat and upright. Let's look at the science of floating. Many ships made of steel are able to float, but not one small steel nail can float. The steel ship weighs several tons, and the nail weighs only a few grams, so floating is not related to weight. If we had a steel block or ball that was the same weight as our steel ship, we already know that the steel block will sink. Then it could be the shape of the ship that causes it to float. The ship's underwater hull, shape and size, displaces water. The volume of water displaced is equal to the underwater volume of the ship's hull. If the weight of water displaced by the underwater volume is equal to the weight of the whole ship, the ship will float. And it floats, because the weight of the water displaced acts as an upward force on the bottom of the ship. Let's say it again. If the weight of water displaced by the underwater volume is equal to the weight of the whole ship, the ship will float. Reserve buoyancy is the space or volume of the enclosed main hull above the waterline. The required reserve buoyancy for vessels is calculated at the design stage, and the vessel is constructed with the appropriate watertight decks, bulkheads, devices and openings. The permitted minimum freeboard in the ship's particulars is based on this. The weight of the steel ship, with no crew, no fuel, no oil, no ballast, no cargo, just the steel, is called the lightweight tonnage. Bear in mind, this diagram is misleading. A ship in this condition is unlikely to be seaworthy. For a start, the draft will be insufficient to allow immersion of the whole propeller. To the lightweight tonnage we add crew and their belongings, fuel, lubricating oils, stores, maybe a little ballast for trim, and maximum cargo. The ship is now at its loaded displacement. The maximum permitted displacement is when the waterline reaches, but does not cross the line across the disc. If you're lucky enough to be on a floating ship, I suppose you will want her to be floating upright. In the moving seaway, we have to ensure that our ship will return to upright. That does not happen by guess. You will have to ensure that your ship can maintain stable equilibrium in a seaway and while alongside transferring cargo. Let us look at afloat and upright again. This time from the perspective of forces and imaginary points. We saw that a ship floats because the weight of the water displaced acts as an upward force on the bottom of the ship. The displacement force, or buoyancy, acting upward, is considered to be acting vertically up from the center of the underwater part of the vessel in diagrams. The force of buoyancy is real, but the location of B is imaginary, like the true North Pole. The force of gravity, acting downward, is considered to be acting vertically down from the geometric center of gravity of the vessel in diagrams. The force of gravity is real, but the location of G is imaginary. The M in this diagram represents the metacenter. The metacenter is a theoretical point at which an imaginary vertical line passing through the center of buoyancy and center of gravity intersects the imaginary vertical line through a new center of buoyancy created when the body is displaced, or tipped, in the water. The metacentric height, or the distance between the center of gravity and the metacenter, is an important calculation in ship stability. This diagram shows the vessel heeled over by 10 degrees. The shape of the underwater part of the ship has changed. The new shape of the underwater part of the ship causes the center of buoyancy to move to a new position, B1. The force of buoyancy on the ship is now acting through B1 up through the metacenter, M. The red line, GZ, in the diagram is a righting lever. In this diagram, we see that the force of buoyancy acts upward on the low side of the ship, and the force of gravity acts down on the centerline of the ship to return it to upright. The ship returns to upright every time it is heeled over. This is the desirable state of positive stability. Let us leave the transverse stability diagrams and use a diagram of a ship to discuss the location of the center of gravity, G. In reality, weights are distributed all around the ship. The stability booklet gives details of the location of the center of gravity of all the relevant spaces on the vessel. This table shows the location of the cargo holds, and in the kg column shows the height of their centers of gravity above the keel. This table shows the location of the fuel oil tanks, and in the kg column shows the height of their centers of gravity above the keel. The boatmaster calculates the whole ship's center of gravity by calculating each space's effect on the ship. Each space's effect on the ship's center of gravity will depend on the weight in each space. It is possible for the center of gravity, G, to end up being above the metacenter, M. As a reminder, in the previous example, the center of gravity of the ship is below the metacenter. When G is below M, a righting moment is created when the ship is heeled over to return it to upright. If the ship's center of gravity, G, is above the metacenter, M, the ship is described as having a negative GM. When the ship is heeled over, the center of gravity force is acting down on the low side, and the buoyancy force is acting up on the high side. This creates a capsizing moment, which is clearly undesirable. How are we going to fix this? A golden rule of ship stability is that a ship's center of gravity will move directly toward any added weight, and away from any weight that is removed. If this is the original position of G, and G will move toward any added weight, let's see what happens if we place a heavy weight on deck on the centerline. When a heavy weight is added on deck on the centerline, there will be bodily sinkage of the ship. The underwater shape of the ship changes with bodily sinkage, and there is a corresponding change in the center of buoyancy, resulting in B moving to B1. The center of gravity, G, moves toward the weight added above, to a new position, G2. Similarly, if heavy weights are added anywhere on deck, there will be bodily sinkage and perhaps a list will develop. The underwater shape of the ship changes, and there is a corresponding change in the center of buoyancy, resulting in B moving to B1. The center of gravity, G, moves toward the weight added above, to a new position, G3. If the majority of weights in the ship is on deck, the center of gravity of the ship will be high. The ship's center of gravity, G, could be above the metacenter, M. The ship would have a negative GM. A ship with a negative GM will have a capsizing moment if heeled. How are we going to fix this? Adding heavy cargo to the lower hold will cause the ship's center of gravity to move down toward the bottom of the ship. If any of the double bottom tanks are empty, G can be lowered by filling the double bottom tank with ballast or bunkers as appropriate. Adding weight to the double bottom tanks will cause the ship's center of gravity to move down toward the bottom of the ship. In the previous section, we saw that filling tanks in the lower part of the ship will lower the ship's center of gravity. When any ship's tank is neither full nor empty, but at some intermediate level, that tank is described as slack. When a partially filled tank is heel over, the liquid sloshes over to the lower side. The center of gravity of the liquid in the tank also moves over to the low side. As the ship rolls from side to side, the sloshing liquid has the same effect as a heavy item sliding from one ship's side to the other and back again. The subdivisions in ship's tanks act to limit the distance the weight of liquid in the tank can move. This fishing boat has stowed all of its catch on deck, and has as positive GM, and will have a righting lever when heeled. The fishing boat with all of its catch stowed on the deck has a small positive GM. This is described as being tender. We can see G below M and above the waterline. This boat has a short righting lever when heeled. Because of the long roll period, this boat experiences less structural stress, but still create more strain on cargo lashing. And because this boat will be slow to return to its upright position, it's easy for water to get on the deck. This fishing boat has stowed all of its catch in the hold, and has as positive GM, and will have a righting lever when heeled. The fishing boat with all of its catch stowed in the hold has a large positive GM. This described as being stiff. We can see G below M and well below the water line. This boat has a long righting lever when heeled. With this long riding moment for even small angles of heel, this boat will return to a stable position very quickly when heeled to one side. This boat is very stable on paper, but also in reality very jerky and uncomfortable for the crew. Due to the short rolling period, this boat will experience structural stress and be prone to damage. The violent rolling makes it difficult to maintain proper cargo lashing.